I'm drowning in bills, while my boyfriend's swimming in cash and I still do all the housework. Am I just a free maid? My partner B, 26M, and I, 26F, have been together for 10 years, living together for 1. I earn $47,000 per year with no bonuses, while B earns around $115,000, plus end-of-year bonuses and other income opportunities. Our rent is $2,800 a month. He covers 2,300, and I pay 1,300, which helps, but I'm still scraping by with no room to save. I'm not looking to splurge, but I'd like to save or invest even a little. While he fairly adjusts rent based on income, all other expenses, like groceries, outings, and even small shared costs, are split 50-50. This leaves me with barely enough for essentials. I no longer go out, buy clothes, or afford basic self-care items without feeling stretched. I'm very independent and not looking to mooch, but the income disparity makes it hard not to feel frustrated. When I ask him to cover a minor cost occasionally, like takeout, he acts like it's unreasonable. In addition, I handle about 90% of the household and emotional labor. While he'll occasionally help if I ask multiple times, it's never consistent, and he rarely finishes tasks fully. I handle our laundry, including his, clean, organize our home, manage our schedules, take care of our cats, update our families, and handle day-to-day upkeep. The imbalance is affecting our intimacy, on my end, and I feel like I'm losing myself under all this responsibility. I barely have any time to myself to live life, especially on weekends. Has anyone found a fair way to balance finances when one partner does most of the housework and mental load? Any advice would be much appreciated. Update 1. So, it's been a few weeks since I posted. I tried talking to B about splitting things differently, or maybe even having him cover a bit more, given how wildly different our incomes are. I started off casual, talking about finances in general, and then slipped in the question of how he feels about taking on some more of our monthly expenses. I thought maybe he hadn't fully realized how strapped I feel every month and how stressful it's been for me to try to manage with my income. Well, turns out he does get it. He just doesn't think it's his responsibility to help. He basically said he doesn't think couples should subsidize each other's lifestyles because it leads to one person feeling dependent on the other, which could cause resentment down the road. That's when I started feeling really weird about the whole thing, like this gut feeling that maybe we're on different pages about some pretty fundamental stuff. I mean, we've been together 10 years, lived together for 1, and are supposedly building a future. But hearing him say that made it feel like he saw us as more like roommates or business partners than partners in life. I thought, okay, maybe he has a point. So I asked him what he thinks we should do about household stuff, because I'm clearly putting way more time and effort into it. If he doesn't want to help me financially, then maybe he could help out more with the housework, right? Well, he hit me with the classic, I'm just not as good at that stuff as you are. Like, really? It's not like I was born with some special gene for cleaning toilets. I told him this wasn't about me being good at it, but about feeling like we're equal partners. He just kind of shrugged it off and said he'd try to do more, which I'm pretty sure translates to, I'll do the dishes once and then claim victory. So, feeling a little defeated, I just left it at that for a few days. I needed to process this, to figure out what it meant for me. I started wondering if I was blowing things out of proportion, or if maybe I needed to just suck it up, because he was technically paying more of the rent. But the whole subsidizing your lifestyle comment wouldn't leave my head. It was such a harsh way to put it, and it made me feel like he thought of me as a burden. I don't want to feel like a mooch, but I also don't want to feel like I'm sacrificing my happiness and sanity just to make things fair by his definition. Then, something happened that shifted things entirely. B had left his laptop open one night while he was asleep, and I'm not proud of it, but I peeked at his messages. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but I guess I just wanted to see if he had maybe vented to a friend about our money conversation or anything that would give me some insight. Instead, I found messages that completely blindsided me. B was chatting with his brother about how he had figured out a way to keep more of his own money by convincing me to cover half of everything else. He actually told his brother he was strategically limiting how much he contributed to our shared life to make sure he wasn't overinvesting in a relationship that might not be permanent. To say I felt crushed doesn't even cover it. Here I was, feeling guilty for even thinking about asking him to cover a bit more, and he's out here treating this like some kind of financial game. Suddenly, it made sense why he was so insistent on keeping everything fair by his standards. He was thinking about this from a completely different perspective, like he was already preparing for an exit strategy, just in case. I'm still in shock about it. I've spent the last 10 years with this guy, and I thought we were building something real together. But it turns out, he's been looking at us as a risk he needs to manage. The part that hurt the most was when he wrote, "She's used to it now, so why change anything?" I don't know what he thinks I'm used to, but I can promise you I'm not used to feeling like someone's financial safety net or like I'm a liability he's trying to minimize. I never once thought of him as an ATM or someone to rely on financially, but I guess I assumed we were on the same team, that we'd both give what we could to make life easier for each other. That's what partners do, right? I'm honestly struggling with what to do now. Part of me wants to confront him right away and just let it all out, but then I think about how he'll probably turn it around on me for looking at his messages. Or maybe he'll just deny it or say I'm overreacting. Another part of me wonders if this is a wake-up call that maybe I should start looking out for myself more. If he's only in this as long as it's convenient for him, then maybe I should be doing the same. So I started making a list of all the things I do around the house, from the laundry to the meal planning, even handling all the cat stuff and keeping our social calendars. It's a long list, and when I see it on paper, it just hits me how much I'm actually doing for us both. I even tracked how many hours a week I spend on housework, which turned out to be way more than I thought. I wanted to get a clear picture of what I'm putting into this relationship versus what he's putting in, and honestly, the imbalance is worse than I thought. I've been thinking about maybe bringing this list to him to show him what it actually looks like to be fair in a relationship. But then the question is, would it even matter to him? If he's already decided that he doesn't want to subsidize me or contribute more than the bare minimum, what are the chances he's going to suddenly step up and see me as an equal partner? Part of me wonders if I'm just fooling myself into thinking he'll change. This relationship has been my whole adult life, and it's hard to even imagine what things would be like without him. But at the same time, I'm not sure I can keep doing this. So for now, I'm focusing on figuring out what I want and what I'm willing to accept. I'm saving as much as I can, trying to make my finances as secure as possible. I guess it's a kind of backup plan, just in case things don't work out. It feels strange and kind of heartbreaking to be thinking this way, but at the same time, I feel like I owe it to myself to make sure I'm okay no matter what. If he's only going to look out for himself, then maybe I need to start doing the same. Update 2. So, after stewing on this for a while, I decided I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I couldn't shake what I'd read in B's messages about strategically limiting his contributions and all that subsidizing nonsense. I kept running it over in my head, thinking maybe I misunderstood or that he didn't mean it that way. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't willing to just let it slide. I deserved to know where he actually stood and whether this was something we could work through or if I needed to start planning my exit. I decided to talk to him over the weekend. I waited until we'd both had breakfast and were kind of settled because I knew this was going to be a big conversation. I started by telling him I'd been feeling the weight of the imbalance in our relationship, financially, emotionally, and in terms of household labor. I said I'd been doing a lot of thinking about what it actually meant to be fair in a partnership, and that I needed us to get on the same page if we were going to keep moving forward. I brought up how hurt I was by the way he'd talked about not wanting to subsidize me, how it felt like he saw me as some kind of financial burden instead of an equal partner. Well, as soon as I mentioned subsidizing, his face changed. I could tell he knew exactly what I was referring to. At first, he tried to brush it off, saying I was overthinking things and that he'd just been venting to his brother. But I wasn't buying it. I told him I'd seen the whole conversation, that I'd read how he planned to keep me doing the bulk of the household work, and how he was worried about over-investing in me. I half expected him to be mad that I'd looked at his messages, but instead, he just kind of went quiet. Then he finally admitted it. He said he wasn't ready to put more into our relationship financially because he wasn't sure about our future together. He tried to make it sound like he was just being practical, but the more he talked, the clearer it became that he saw our relationship as something temporary. He actually said, "I don't think either of us should be putting in more than we're getting back." I was floored. Here I was, 10 years in, thinking we were building a life together, and he's over here treating this like a transaction. I asked him point blank if he even saw a future with me, if he could picture us getting married or building a family. He hesitated, and then he said, "I'm not sure I believe in marriage. I think it complicates things." That's when I knew. All these years, I'd been investing in us, thinking we were heading toward a future, and he'd been hedging his bets the whole time. I felt like I'd been hit with a ton of bricks. Everything I'd sacrificed, all the work I'd put into our relationship, suddenly felt pointless. After that, I couldn't even look at him. I went for a long walk to clear my head and tried to figure out what I wanted to do. I felt like I'd wasted a decade of my life with someone who didn't even see me as someone worth committing to. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I started thinking about all the times I'd been the one to compromise, to go out of my way to make things work, while he'd just done the bare minimum to keep things fair in his eyes. When I got back, I told him I needed some space and that I'd be staying with a friend for a few days. I packed a bag and went to crash at my best friend's place. It was a relief to be out of the apartment, to have some room to think without him around. While I was there, my friend and I had a really deep conversation about what I actually wanted out of life and whether B was capable of giving me that. She pointed out that I'd been settling for way less than I deserved, and it was like a light bulb went off. She was right. I'd been so focused on keeping the peace and making things work that I hadn't even thought about what I wanted or needed. I stayed at my friend's for a few days, and during that time, something kind of wild happened. I got a call from a former colleague who mentioned there was an opening at a new job that paid way more than I was making. She thought of me because she knew I'd been looking for something that offered better financial stability. Honestly, the timing couldn't have been better. I had nothing to lose, so I applied and ended up getting the job. The pay was a huge step up, almost double what I was making before. Suddenly, I felt this incredible sense of freedom. I realized I didn't need to stay in a relationship that wasn't giving me what I wanted just to make ends meet. With this new job, I could actually afford my own place, and I wouldn't have to rely on B to cover the rent or split costs. It felt empowering to know I had options and that I didn't have to settle for someone who saw me as a financial liability. I started looking at apartments, imagining what life could be like on my own, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I could have my own space, set my own rules, and actually build a life that made me happy. After I signed the job offer, I went back to our apartment to talk to B one last time. I told him about the new job and that I'd be moving out. He looked genuinely shocked. I think he'd assumed I'd just keep putting up with things and that he could string me along as long as it suited him. But this time, I was done. I told him I deserved someone who wanted to build a future with me, not someone who treated me like a line item in their budget. He tried to convince me to stay, saying he'd be willing to work on things and that he'd rethink his approach. But it felt hollow. If he'd been serious about us, he wouldn't have needed this wake-up call to step up. Packing my things felt surreal. I thought I'd feel more sadness, but instead, I felt this incredible sense of relief. I was finally putting myself first, and it felt good. I realized I'd been so focused on making him happy, on keeping things fair, that I'd completely lost sight of my own happiness. Leaving was hard, but staying would have been even harder. As I'm writing this, I'm in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, and it's messy and chaotic, but it's mine. I'm figuring out how to do things on my own, and yeah, it's a little scary, but it's also exciting. For the first time, I feel like I'm building a life that's truly mine. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I deserve better than what I was getting with B, and now I'm finally free to go after it.